Hi, I am Kevin Realbrecht, one of the developers of the IC Bioconductor package, and I want to follow up on issue 580, which I have done a video that I'm going to link to in the description. So I'm not going to go into as many details last time, but I'm going to explain the progress made in this video. So briefly, issue 580 was an unnecessary re-rendering of the complex heat map. Essentially, when the heat map is receiving a selection from another panel, if the selection in that upstream panel changes, the heat map may or may not need to be re-rendered. And at the moment, the heat map is re-rendering too much. And what I have found and what I'm describing in the post I'm going to send is that I have a partial fix at the moment. Because the heat map is a bit of a special panel, we cannot yet solve every problem. So I'm solving the one that seems the most pressing in this issue, and I'm going to give myself more time to look into a more time-consuming solution to the more general issue. So right now, with this fix, which I am still to merge, but I will shortly, the complex heat map panel will not re-render anymore when an upstream selection changes if the checkbox use custom rows is checked and the checkbox restrict to selected columns is not checked. So this is because, like I said, the heat map is a special panel. It's the only panel in the IC package that shows information referring to both the rows and the columns. Every other panel is specifically looking at either row information, so features. A raw data plot shows one data point per feature in the data set, and a column data plot shows one dot per column in the data set. While the heat map essentially shows both, which means it can receive selections both on the rows and the columns, which is creating this scenario that we don't yet have code for. So if the heat map is either listening to the rows of the upstream panel or the columns from an upstream panel, then the heat map will re-render if either the row or the column selection change, if any of the two changes, which obviously we want finer control of the re-rendering. We only want to update the heat map if the incoming row selection changes when the heat map is not using custom rows, or if the column selection changes when the heat map is restricting its column to the incoming selection. So that those two scenarios are not distinguishable at the moment in the current code base, and it takes more work than I can do right now to fix those two. So that's why right now the partial fix is to not re-render the heat map if it's not listening to anything, which hopefully will cover a good fraction of the use cases. But obviously we want to go into that more detailed handling of scenarios. So briefly, what I wanted to show is the fix is simply adding a generic or defining a generic for the heat map, which wasn't defined so far, which says that so it's a true or false. So if the heat map is not using custom features, or if it's restricting its columns to the incoming selection, in that case, that generic will trigger re-rendering of the heat map. And yes, so ideally we want to. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but most likely this generic will sort of split into two, or we'll have a different pair of generics that says, is the panel listening to a row selection or to a column selection, and then update accordingly. So it's really an interplay between the upstream and the downstream panels, which is more complicated than we currently handle. So at this point, what I wanted to briefly show is that yes, this multi-selection restricted function, it's probably over the top, but just to take a second So I'm going into the IC code base after in my branch, and that function is essentially what's the name of this function? It's quite a long one. It's the child propagation observer. So basically propagating a selection from a parent panel to a child panel, and at some point, if for the when the parent panel is updated, the heat map will be one of the children, and if the children is restricting its view, either its row or its columns, to an incoming selection, then it needs to be redrawn, regenerated, and repopulated without going into too much detail. So this is my issue at the moment, is that we can only say that it's restricted, but we don't know whether it's row or column, and that is something that is specific to the heat map and that we haven't addressed yet. So yeah, I'm not gonna go into any more detail than that here. What I will do is show you the debug script, which is, let's see, loading right now over here. So I've added a third script in the IC debug repository. I'm probably gonna add a link to the video for that. And in that script, I am using a different dataset from the previous example, just to make sure that it's a big enough dataset, but it's still publicly available. So I'm using a 10x PBMC data package and 68,000 PBMCs. That's enough to make the bug visible, because a smaller dataset in my first attempt was not enough to really to show the bug, essentially. So I'm adding a tour, and I'm running the app. So going back to my web browser, I have launched that script, and I'm going to invite you in the application. So the app explores the behavior of the issue 580. The complex heat map is listening to row data table 1. So if I change the set of row in the table, the heat map may or may not change. And so since the heat map is listening to the table, we're saying it should change. However, the heat map is using custom rows, so in that case, it shouldn't change. And I just want to highlight also that we are not restricting the heat map to any column, and there's no incoming selection and incoming column selection anyway, so the heat map should not react. So this is the thing that it seems irrelevant to the connection between a row table and the rows of a heat map, but at the moment, if that box is checked, the heat map will re-render even if only the row selection changes. So this is the limitation at the moment. So if I go back up here, and so I'm using custom rows, so if I'm subsetting the table, you notice that the table subsetted to 100 entries out of 32,000, and the heat map did not trigger. So this is the behavior that the user reporting the bug wanted. If I untick the custom rows, the heat map will refresh, because then it won't be using custom rows by definition, and the custom rows are now those 100 genes in the table. And what I want to highlight is, if I also click that box restrict to selected columns, the heat map will also re-render, because again of this special heat map behavior that's not capable of distinguishing between a row and a column selection. So if that box is ticked or if that box is unticked, the heat map will re-render. So what I'm going to do is the natural thing of unticking the custom rows. So now the heat map re-renders because it's not using its custom row, it's using the rows from the incoming selection from the table. So, and also I say selection, but it's basically the 100 rows that are present in the table. It is possible to select one row at a time in the table, but that's not affecting the heat map. What the heat map cares about is the list, is the filtered list of genes in that table. So I can sort it up here, or I can sort it directly in the box under the gene symbol. Yeah, so it will take a tiny bit of time because it's running on my laptop. Let's just give it a second. Maybe I should have limited it even a little bit further. Uh, okay, come on now. And there we go. We have the heat map limited to the 100 entries that are present in the filter table. So any gene that starts with IL something. If I add IL1, so that would restrict it to 44 entries, and then the heat map would re-trigger Android again. And yeah, so if I clicked again use custom rows, then it would again break the connection with the table and instead show the one gene that is currently in the custom row field. Not sure if edit feature names, that would open a modal, but now the application is running a little bit slow, so it's not gonna all work together. So yes, just to summarize that, so I do have, I will merge now this pull request. And yeah, happy to get any feedback. So version 2.9.3 available in a couple of days on the Biconnector Devel branch. Thank you for watching, and I hope you like this kind of video. Bye bye.